think there were not many people who understood just how broad his interests were and how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range of organisation.
Windsor's walls have witnessed their fair share of secrets, betrayals, and whispered plans, but nothing quite like this. Behind the gilded gates and meticulously cultivated smiles, a maelstrom was brewing, pitting duty against conscience, ambition against innocence, and at the center of it all, Princess Charlotte is a young girl who never asked for any of this. Charlotte is the epitome of regal grace, bright-eyed, kind-hearted, and already adored by millions. However, behind closed doors, unseen by cameras and concealed beneath layers of royal formality, she had become a pawn in a game far more cruel than anybody outside the palace walls could have imagined. It's rumored that Queen Camilla herself is behind the game. According to royal insiders, Camilla, who has fought tooth and nail for years to establish her place beside King Charles, is now focusing on the next generation. But not to protect them. No, Camilla was focused on the future of her grandchildren, the Parker Bowles line, and making sure they were not overshadowed by the burgeoning fame of Charlotte, William, and Kate's kid, the child destined to carry Diana's legacy on. What started as discreet manipulation quickly escalated into something considerably more ominous. It wasn't about titles or tiaras, but about power, influence. There is also a legacy. According to family sources, Camilla made subtle moves such as minimizing Charlotte's appearances, proposing she take on less engagements as she grew older, and pushing the notion that the monarchy must modernize by balancing attention across all royal grandkids, including her own. Camilla hadn't reckoned on the mute witness in the wings, Princess Anne. Anne, known as the hardest-working queen, has long taken pleasure in her unwavering commitment to the kingdom. She had remained mute during decades of scandal, tragedy, and royal feuds. But this? Is history about to repeat itself at the price of an innocent child? Anne found it unpleasant. This is the secret story of how Princess Anne, a stoic, duty-bound figure typically regarded as the frigid enforcer of tradition, burst into tears. In a moment that rocked the family to its core, she opted to ignore Camilla's calculated intentions and stand between Charlotte and the storm. Stay with us as we discover the unseen fight that erupted within palace walls, a confrontation that could redefine the monarchy's future, and the emotional breaking point of a princess who ultimately prioritized family before the crown. This is ***. Princess Anne breaks into tears as she saves Princess Charlotte from Queen Camilla. It started quietly, so quietly that few in the royal circle noticed the change at first. Queen Camilla, who had hitherto preferred to remain in the shadow of King Charles, had grown braver. With Charles firmly on the throne and her own position safe, Camilla's emphasis, according to palace gossip, shifted to something far more personal. Securing the future of her own bloodline at the expense of those she perceived as threats. Who was at the top of that list? Princess Charlotte. Camilla's grandchildren, Lola, Eliza, Gus, Louis, and Freddie, had always held an unusual position within the royal family. They were beloved in private, but lacked royal titles and obligations, so they lived on the outside of the firm. However, Camilla felt that this wasn't enough. She had spent decades vying for a place at Charles's side, facing public ridicule and frigid stares from both the public and the palace. And now, with the crown on her head, she wasn't going to let her grandkids fall behind while Diana's granddaughter, Diana's legacy, was ready to capture the nation's heart. Camilla started planting seeds behind the scenes, according to insiders. It began with recommendations over tea at Clarence House and subtle remarks during private family meetings. She would speak about fairness and modernity. "It's only right that all of the grandchildren are treated equally," she'd say, her voice quiet but determined. On the surface, everything seemed noble, but those paying attention began to recognize the true motive. Asterisk, asterisk, a stealthy campaign to lower Charlotte's light so that her own grandchildren could shine brighter in comparison. Asterisk, asterisk. The first indication came when Camilla allegedly proposed in a private meeting with Charles and senior courtiers that Charlotte's future role in the monarchy be reconsidered. With the monarchy streamlining, Camilla argued, was it truly necessary for the young princess to bear such public duties when she came of age? Wouldn't it be wiser and more modern to minimize the burden on future generations? But underneath these carefully selected words was a terrible intent to limit Charlotte's destiny and make room for her own offspring. Camilla, according to individuals familiar with the issue, did not stop there. Insiders believe she began to have influence over scheduling decisions. Charlotte's invitations to attend specific family functions quietly vanished. Public appearances that may have raised Charlotte's visibility were instead provided to other family members or canceled entirely under the pretense of slimming down the monarchy. At the same time, Camilla allegedly encouraged Charles to spend more time with her grandkids, bringing them closer to the center of family life while quietly excluding Charlotte. Then there was the issue of the press. While Kate and William had always been careful of their children's privacy, palace watchers noted an odd trend. Positive tales about Camilla's grandkids began to appear in favorable outlets. Sweet anecdotes and charming photos. Suddenly, Camilla's clan was being softly introduced to the world as a healthy, modern extension of the royal family. Meanwhile, Charlotte's personal moments became fewer, and her position at the center of the firm gradually but definitely deteriorated. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Camilla's strategy was how diligently she kept her hands clean. There were no clear orders or blatant slights, only quiet suggestions, carefully built narratives, and subtle redirections. Camilla was more aware than anyone else of the dangers of open confrontation in the royal world. She had survived decades of being portrayed as a villain in public. This time, she planned to play the game with finesse. Camilla had not anticipated, however, that someone else had been observing, someone who understood the cost of silence and the anguish of witnessing a kid sacrificed for palace politics. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, who had hitherto prioritized duty above everything else, found herself at a crossroads. As Camilla's web tightened around Charlotte, Anne's conscience began to stir unexpectedly. Camilla's meticulous strategy would eventually run into the one factor she couldn't control: a weeping aunt willing to risk everything for the sake of the next generation. Princess Anne had always been the royal family's rock, the one who never flinched, hesitated, or let emotion interfere with duty. She had been raised with absolute loyalty to the crown since she was able to walk. She worked harder than anyone else, remained silent during the family's numerous scandals, and took pride in being the dependable one, the royal who could be counted on to do what was necessary, no matter the cost. But as Camilla's stealthy campaign against Princess Charlotte progressed, something deep within Anne began to change. Initially, she attempted to ignore it. She reminded herself that it wasn't her business to meddle. She was not Charlotte's mother. She was not even next in line for the throne. Her goal was to respect tradition and safeguard the institution above all else. That was what she had always done. That is what she must do. Nevertheless, guilt crept in like a swelling flood. Anne began to observe what others ignored or refused to accept. Small moments that wounded her conscience. A family dinner in which Charlotte's name was conspicuously missing from the subject of future engagements. But Camilla's grandkids were complimented for their charm and potential. Charlotte was supposed to attend a charity function with her parents, but her name was removed off the guest list at the last minute. Kate's little painful expressions when these slights occurred, which she attempted to conceal beneath her trained royal smile. It was impossible not to think of Diana in those moments. Anne had never truly understood her sister-in-law, but now she saw her in a new light. Diana battled tooth and nail to protect William and Harry from royal intrigue. Anne, in her stoic devotion to duty, had remained mute. And look what had happened. Diana was lonely, devastated, and eventually lost. Was she about to let history repeat itself? Late at night, alone in her own apartments at Gatcombe Park, Anne was haunted by memories she thought she had long forgotten. Diana had cried quiet tears in Anne's presence, the agony of seeing William and Harry walk behind their mother's coffin, with the weight of royal expectations crushing their tiny shoulders. And now there came Charlotte, a bright, innocent girl, entangled in yet another royal storm. Anne could see the storm coming. The internal conflict raged within her. One aspect of Anne, the hardened princess who had spent her entire life serving the crown, told her to stay the course, to leave things be. It was not her fight. To speak out would risk dividing the family, undermining the king, and putting a pall over the monarchy at a time when it couldn't afford another scandal. But the other part, the aunt, grandmother, and woman who had witnessed Diana's tragedy and promised never to see such anguish again, could not remain mute. Every little snub to Charlotte felt like a betrayal. Every whispered conspiracy to ruin the girl's future seemed like a dagger in Anne's soul. She began to retreat from Camilla, no longer able to pretend affection. Conversations became strained, courteous yet frigid. She found herself looking for Charlotte at family gatherings, delivering small acts of kindness, a kind hand on the shoulder, a warm smile, and a word of encouragement. But internally, Anne knew that wasn't enough. The guilt became intolerable. Anne could no longer pretend she didn't see what was going on. She knew deep down that she would soon have to make a decision between the crown and her conscience, between devotion to the monarch and loyalty to what was right. The question was no longer whether Anne would act. That was asterisk when asterisk. Camilla had no idea how close her plots were to failing. It was supposed to be just another calm afternoon at Windsor, a private family meeting in the name of togetherness, away from the prying eyes of the public and the ever-watchful lenses of the press. The scene was intimate, a drawing room steeped in history, its walls hung with paintings of long-dead rulers, their eyes seeming to watch over the tragedies of the living. But what happened that day was a watershed moment that no one present will ever forget. There were few people in attendance, which was planned. King Charles had invited them, hoping to diffuse rising tensions before they erupted beyond the palace walls. Camilla, poised and calculating as usual, sat beside him like the queen she had battled so hard to become. There stood Kate, apparently calm, but with a storm raging behind her eyes, a mother's rage hardly contained. William stood at her side, protective and constrained, his jaw clenched so hard that it seemed to hurt. And then there was Princess Anne, silently watching, torn between the duty she had upheld her entire life and the moral line she could no longer cross. Camilla made it obvious from the start of the meeting that she planned to take control. With her typical gentle voice and refined charm, she discussed the monarchy's destiny, the need for balance and fairness. "It's time to start thinking about the roles of all the grandchildren," she remarked, her words sweet but painful. "We do not want any of them to feel overlooked. Not my grandchildren, not Charlotte, not George, not even Louis. It must be equivalent, modern, progressive." However, those who actually listened understood what she meant. Camilla was not calling for fairness. Rather, she was attempting to level the playing field by cutting Charlotte down to size. By gently reducing the young princess's significance, Camilla was able to put her own grandchildren closer to the spotlight, influence, and the crown's destiny. Kate's hands tightened on her chair's armrest, leaving her knuckles white. William's face reddened with suppressed wrath. But it was Anne who felt the most intense shock. She had sensed Camilla's motives, but hearing them voiced so calmly and coldly brought everything into terrible perspective. Anne finally found her voice, and her tone was quiet but forceful. "Charlotte is the daughter of the future king. She is a part of that future, just like George is, just as Louis is. There is no reason to minimize her role." Camilla gave a trained smile, but there was steel beneath it. "No one is disparaging anyone, Anne, but times have changed. The monarchy must adapt alongside it. We cannot allow the mistakes of the past to govern our destiny." The words, "the mistakes of the past," weighed thick in the air. Anne interpreted them as a dagger directed at Diana's memory, the very legacy Camilla had long attempted to alter. And in that moment, Anne saw the entire depth of Camilla's plan. not just to influence the future, but also to erase the past. The place sank into a deep stillness, the kind that precedes storms. Charles appeared anguished, torn between his wife's ambition and his sister's growing disobedience. Kate's eyes glistened, but she stood firm. William's hand touched hers, a tacit promise of unification. That meeting transformed Anne's life forever. The princess, who had once stood as the embodiment of royal duty, now had a new mission: to keep Charlotte from becoming another victim of palace politics. Camilla left, thinking she had won the day, but she failed to notice the resolve stiffening in Anne's gaze, the storm rising behind the stoic mask. The Queen's strategy had just faced its most serious threat, a weeping aunt eager to act. It happened at what should have been a happy occasion, a sunlit garden party at Sandringham, a rare opportunity for the royal family to portray a united front to the world. But despite the polite banter, clinking glasses, and fluttering bunting, the tension was overwhelming. Princess Anne had attempted to steel herself, concealing her emotions beneath layers of regal dignity, but this time she couldn't. The day had started innocently enough. Charlotte, dressed in a pastel blue frock with a ribbon in her hair, a tone that uncannily resembled Diana's favorite color, had been looking forward to attending. The young princess, bright and enthusiastic, wanted to make her family pleased. She curtsied correctly, greeted guests with studied grace, and remained by Kate's side, staring up at her mother for silent reassurance. But as the afternoon progressed, Anne became aware of the subtle slights, small, deliberate movements that could easily go missed by those who were not looking for them. Camilla, who was always the picture of grandmotherly tenderness in public, kept her own youngsters close, caring over them and dragging them into conversations with senior royals and distinguished guests. Charlotte, despite her status as the future king's daughter, was quietly removed from the circle. At one point, the kids gathered for an informal portrait with their grandparents. Camilla expertly organized the occasion, ensuring that her own grandchildren were prominently featured. When Charlotte hesitated at the group's edge, Camilla turned to her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, sweetie," she murmured, loud enough for others nearby to hear. "Why don't you give the younger ones their time? You've received lots of attention." The words, though said kindly, hit like a slap. Charlotte's smile wavered. She took a step back, uncertainty flashing across her face, her small hands curling together in a move that revealed her pain. Kate instinctively approached her daughter, but Anne was faster. For a heartbeat, time appeared to stand still. Anne saw Diana in that moment, a young woman who had been secluded, pushed aside, and made to feel small within these confines. And she witnessed history repeating itself. The burden of decades, the shame of being silent, the remorse of not doing more, came tumbling down. Before she could stop herself, Anne came forward, her voice shaky but clear. "That's enough, Camilla." The words hung in the air, stunning anyone who heard them. The royal staff froze. Charles, in the middle of a conversation, turned around, his look horrified. Camilla blinked, as if she couldn't believe Anne had spoken up. Anne's voice cracked, full with emotion. "This is not how we would treat one of our own. Charlotte has the same right to stand proudly here as any other youngster. Don't make her feel otherwise." A silence descended over the group. For the first time in years, Anne's mask had slipped. Tears welled up in her eyes, not just for Charlotte, but also for Diana, for the familial fissures she had witnessed, and for every minute she had stood by while she should have battled. Camilla, taken off guard, attempted to regroup. "Anne, I didn't mean..." Unfortunately, it was too late. The damage was done. Anne's statements violated the unspoken norm of royal gatherings. Preserve the calm at all costs. However, it was evident in that moment that Anne had chosen something far more vital than peace. She'd selected Charlotte. Behind the scenes, things became chaotic. Courtiers scrambled to smooth things off. Charles, caught between his wife and sister, appeared older in an instant. But Anne didn't care. The time for stillness has passed. And for the first time in decades, the Princess Royal felt the heavy chains of duty give way to something far more powerful: love. In the days following Anne's dramatic stand, the atmosphere inside the palace changed in ways that the public never saw. The long simmering schism was finally unmistakable. Behind the manicured grins at engagements and the meticulously arranged family portraits, the royal family had been shaken to its very core. While Camilla felt the sting of Anne's censure, Kate and William quietly began to act, not with rage, not with public declarations, but with the tenacity that only a parent can muster. They understood the stakes. Charlotte was more than just a royal child. She was Diana's grandchild, a living symbol of the desire for a more compassionate, modern monarchy. Kate and William were not about to allow Camilla, or anyone else, dull that glow. The first step was subtle. William and Kate collaborated with their trusted aides to tighten the circle around Charlotte. Invitations to specific family reunions were respectfully rebuffed. Instead, they concentrated on building a pleasant, secure environment at home, one in which Charlotte could develop without experiencing the icy shadow of palace politics. Charlotte excelled at Kensington and Windsor, where she was seen as a bright, curious girl rather than a player in some royal game. Kate, ever the thinker beneath her calm appearance, took further precautions. She ensured that Charlotte's public engagements were carefully planned, not overexposed, but always significant. When Charlotte did come into the spotlight, it was for causes that reflected her personality and potential: children's charities, environmental initiatives, and moments that quietly tied her to Diana's legacy of kindness and service. Kate's actions transformed the narrative. Charlotte was no longer the spare princess. She represented the future, a softer, more authentic royal family. William, too, did his role. At official engagements, he made an effort to include Charlotte in modest but meaningful ways, such as offering her his hand as they walked or halting to speak to her in full face of the cameras. Each motion conveyed the same message: asterisk, this is my daughter, she belonged here; asterisk, she matters. And then there was Princess Anne. The friendship that developed between Anne and Charlotte during that disastrous garden party grew stronger by the day. Whereas Anne had previously kept a respectable distance from the younger generation, she has suddenly become an unexpected ally. Insiders claimed that Anne would frequently seek Charlotte out at family gatherings, delivering modest words of support and teaching her the secret principles of royal life: how to persevere, stand strong, and be true to oneself despite the weight of the crown. Camilla found herself increasingly isolated. The charm that had previously smoothed over so many of her plans was no longer effective. Courtiers became wary, afraid to align themselves too closely with a queen whose ambitions had failed so badly. According to insiders, Charles has become more hesitant, not as willing to support Camilla's initiatives when they include the grandchildren. Kate and William had drawn a line in the sand. Even if the palace continued to create an image of togetherness, the war had been won behind closed doors, not through confrontation or controversy, but by quiet power, strategic grace, and unwavering love. In protecting Charlotte from harm, William and Kate did more than merely protect their daughter. They gave a clear message to both the world and the family. Diana's legacy lives on, and no amount of palace intrigue can ever silence it again. In the monarchy's great halls, where allegiance is frequently measured in silence and sacrifice, Princess Anne's tearful stand was a rare and profound departure from precedent. The princess, who had spent her entire life prioritizing duty over feeling, now decided to speak from the heart. And in doing so, she not only protected Charlotte, but also reminded the entire royal family of the true meaning of service, not to the throne, but to the people who support it. Camilla's carefully woven web of power had been ripped apart, not by scandal or public outrage, but by the quiet strength of family unity. Her intentions for her grandchildren, disguised as rhetoric of fairness and modernism, were revealed for what they were: a thinly veiled attempt to rewrite the future, to erode Diana's legacy and guarantee her own place through the next generation. Camilla misjudged the depth of that tradition, as well as the deep love that connects William, Kate, and now Anne in their quest to preserve it. Charlotte, still so small, may never completely comprehend the maelstrom that raged around her during those stressful months, but she will know and feel the steadfast support of those who were by her side when it counted the most. She will grow up knowing that her place in the royal line was not given to her by birthright alone, but was protected by people who refused to let history repeat itself. Anne emerged from the shadows of duty with her head held higher than ever. Many saw her as the surprise hero, the aunt who chose love over silence, truth over convenience, rather than the austere enforcer of royal procedure. In the end, the struggle for Charlotte was waged not with crowns or titles, but with courage, tears, and a quiet determination to do the right thing. Diana's soul lives on in this modest, powerful gesture of family protection, not in marble statues or extravagant ceremonies. Asterisk. Because sometimes the most powerful stand is made with a shaky voice and a tear-streaked face.